Hi.
All right, this is the workshop on open space and how it fits into the 2022 Bond Act. We have 4 distinguished panelists that will be doing presentations on different aspects of open space. I'm not going to give a full biography on them. They are, the biographies are listed in our conference website. That's nysacc.net. So if you want to follow up on them, what I'll do is simply just give you their name, their organization, and their position. So having said that, I'd like to move quickly into this because we do want to allow opportunities for Q&A at the end. And that's, we will be handling Q&A through the chat function. I also ask you to use a speaker view because that would be the most efficient way of viewing the presentation. So all of the attendees should just switch to speaker view. Having said that, our first speaker is Rob Breen. He's a climate policy analyst for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation's Office Change, where he leads the climate adaptation and communication section responsible for climate change adaptation and resilience policy, planning and communication. Rob, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen here. And just let me know when you can actually see this. All right, I'm assuming that this is available. All right, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to take a look at climate change adaptation and open space, the connection there, and of course, an emphasis on funding opportunities. So let me give you a couple of summary points here. Climate change is rapidly unfolding. Right now, we have impacts, significant local impacts, both now and we anticipate those in the future. Even if we cut our current carbon emissions, which we are doing right now, and New York is a national leader in this, it is still going to leave a gap that adaptation and resilience actions need to fill. And then keep in mind that climate change is a threat multiplier. So any existing underlying social and environmental problems, these are going to be exacerbated by climate change impacts. And then a final point is that protecting open space, it's going to reduce those stressors, those threats, and it's going to build resilience and adaptive capacity. So just very quickly, some impacts in New York that we need to be concerned about that are relevant for open space actions. So we have extreme heat, and that we have experiencing some crop loss, livestock loss as a result of that. Urban heat islands, so impacts on humans and human health impacts. With extreme precipitation coming from some storms and drought, we have risks to our drinking water. With sea level rise, we have loss of wetlands. With extreme storms, then corresponding storm surge and flooding, we have damage to coastal communities. And then with habitat stress, we're seeing wildlife migrate and some biodiversity loss. There's many other impacts, but these would be relevant for some of our open space efforts. So for climate change and open space, we're really concerned about natural and nature-based solutions to climate change. And these include both carbon sequestration storage, that's what we typically call mitigation efforts, and that we do this via what's called natural and working lands efforts, where we engage forests, wetlands, farmlands in New York State to sequester and store carbon. And then the second natural or nature-based solution includes what we call ecosystem-based adaptation, EBA. And those sets of solutions and strategies very specifically for using nature to advance adaptation and resilience measures. And so nature, when we're doing these open space projects, nature can accomplish both of these and does accomplish both of these. For climate change and open space, climate change adaptation resilience efforts, they help both communities and they help ecosystems. And they do it at the same time. So these open space efforts are appropriate, particularly in high-risk coastal zones and flood risk areas. I want to highlight that because of the amount of funding that would be available to address the coastal zones and these high flood risk areas. Okay? So consider open space efforts in those areas in particular. And because those high-risk areas are going to need to come up with some strategies to maybe get some inappropriate development, housing, infrastructure out of those high-risk zones, or maybe it'll be coastal impacts from storms or flooding or sea level rise. They're going to impact those. There's an opportunity for looking at land conversion or alternative uses for that, and that falls right within the venue for open space to be able to address those. Note, by the way, that CACs can include climate change adaptation resilience responsibilities, which includes planning, implementation, wetland mapping, and local protection. And so very specifically, when there are open space projects, those CACs can get funding to actually address those, and also can use funding for building local capacity through those CACs to increase adaptive capacity at the local level. And just throwing out some ideas so we know what we're talking about here with open space, particularly with green infrastructure, which is one particular use for open space. But we're talking about green infrastructure that includes riparian buffers. We look at forests, floodplains, wetlands, green roofs, pervious pavement, rain gardens, swales, planters gardens, and all of these can actually be incorporated in urban areas or even suburban and rural areas in some cases. And they provide a variety of benefits to help us to adapt to climate change impacts. So that's local cooling, for example, in urban heat island areas, but also preservation of natural hydrology and especially in drought-prone areas. And there's a variety of other benefits too. And then also with climate change and open space, when we talk about funding, we talk about both direct funding via grants, which is what everybody's really used to, of course. Two particular ones I'll mention today, although there are many other ones, but two particular ones will be the Environmental Bond Act, which is going before voters this November, and then currently existing Climate Smart Communities grants, which are run through DEC's Office of Climate Change. But it's also important to remember that for local communities, they'll often use that funding to secure support services and technical assistance. So keep in mind, we also offer what we might call indirect funding by providing some of the support services and technical assistance. And so 3 examples of that is our Climate Smart Communities coordinators, who are outreach staff who are out in the field working with communities, and they can help to with Climate Smart Communities grants. And then the Climate Smart Communities also can help with, and they're kicking off efforts right now to do local climate change adaptation and resilience planning. So if a community was going to use funding to do an adaptation and resilience plan, the coordinators right now are selecting communities to engage in adaptation and resilience planning, indirectly funding those because the coordinators themselves are actually funded to do this. And then also, we work closely with the Division of Water in the Office of Climate Change on the Resilient New York Streams, which is an ecosystem-based adaptation initiative for doing project implementation. So if you happen to be in a community that has a Resilient New York Streams project within it, there's some opportunity to work with DEC and Division of Water staff to move forward on project implementation that can benefit local communities. Let's go ahead and jump into these 2 kind of key open space funding sources in New York State. So we have this Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. You've got to love the name, by the way. And this bond act is the first bond act in a couple of decades for New York. And by doing this bond, New York State will actually release this and as a typical bond, a municipal bond, and that'll attract additional funding. And that funding has to be dedicated by statute for environmental projects. Note, by the way, that this bond act is not yet passed. It's going before voters. So that happens in November. And as a member of a state agency staff, I'm not going to advocate how people should vote, but just to be aware of of what this is, so you have a little bit more information to help inform your decision when you go to vote in November. And then as a local community, to be prepared for the Clean Bond, the Environmental Bond Act, should it pass in November. So what this includes is a $4.2 billion fund. And this is used in a variety of different ways. So you can see in the diagram here, it's for water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure, and there's an amount by statute that's dedicated. And note that these numbers are funding in millions, so that's $650 million. The Open Space Land Conservation and Recreation Fund is $650 million. Note that open space is built right into that with the language. But restoration and flood risk reduction at 1.1 billion and climate change mitigation at 1.5 billion. Those funds also can be used for open space projects too. So let me get to a little bit of the detail of that. Of this, also it is a requirement that 35% of the benefits will be dedicated to disadvantaged communities with a goal of achieving 40% of those benefits. And again, that the Bond Act will be on the ballot November 8th and will be up to voters to decide on this. And then there are just a variety of different categories for opportunities to fund local open space and climate change projects that would be relevant for local communities. In Title III of this, I already mentioned in that previous diagram that there are a variety of different pots. This is the Title III, and the legislation actually sets up these limitations. But what I did in here is I included this, and I can make this a PowerPoint presentation available when I'm finished with this. But I highlighted in red some of these things are going to be especially particularly relevant for local communities to advance open space projects. So see down toward the bottom, the restoration projects, which includes floodplain, wetland, stream restoration, forest conservation, some wildlife species projects, or land acquisition. Title V, which has open space right in the title, includes farmland protections and easements, open space land conservation projects. And then there's some recreational infrastructure projects, 125 million set aside for this. And keep in mind that the Bond Act is, as it is written right now, the intent is that it would be spread over a 10-year period. So it's an amount of money that can be used once this is passed over about 10 years. There'll be funding available over that period. Under Title VII, very specifically, is the climate change section. Note that the title says climate change mitigation, but they're not using it in the same sense that we do with mitigation and adaptation. It really includes both of those. So there are adaptation resilience projects that are baked into this also. Note that there's not less than 100 million is going to be used for climate change adaptation and mitigation projects through the Climate Smart Communities grants. So we already have existing EPF funding for those grants. This puts another $100 million into that pot that we can run through the Climate Smart Communities competitive grants program. But it also sets aside another 300 million for other projects to deal with climate change, including urban forestry. We've got these urban heat projects, including green roofs, community gardens, kind of the green infrastructure stuff. And then projects that utilize natural and working lands to sequester carbon. So these are those additional mitigation projects. And keep in mind, of course, that open space projects can do both mitigation and adaptation at the same time. And then with the water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure, that's Title IX of the Bond Act, and that's for water improvement and infrastructure projects. This can include, there's 200 million that's set aside for projects like green infrastructure or projects to reduce farm nutrient runoff. Okay, and then with climate smart communities, a little bit about that if you haven't heard, but there was a whole presentation that one of my colleagues had presented earlier today, Dazzle Ekblad. But just as a real quick, if you hadn't attended that, I want to make sure at least you know what this is. There are climate smart communities, 364 of them registered throughout New York State. 100 of those communities have been certified, so they do that through climate actions, both mitigation and adaptation actions. And there have been 3,384 certification actions completed since 2014. So communities are moving forward with this. Some of the climate smart communities benefits include free technical assistance. So that's that kind of indirect funding we were talking about through regional climate smart communities coordinators, or like our extension staff, and then through this local climate adaptation planning. We also provide guidance and tools on how to do this. So communities wouldn't have to pay for that if they actually got it through this indirect funding. Then we have an extensive website with some of the information and decision support tools. And very specifically with the funding, we have two categories. The one that we're most concerned about for today for open space planning are these climate smart communities grants. So I'll give you some details. All right. So for certification actions, if you're a community that is a climate smart community registered, you can apply for these grants, and that helps you to seek certification actions. And we have one particular set of certification actions called PE7. And those include climate vulnerability assessments and climate adaptation plans, for example. But we also have implementation grants too, and those are from 50,000 to up to 2 million. So these are pretty significant. It could also include engineering design for those projects too. And there's two subcategories for those implementation projects, both the mitigation and adaptation. And again, keep in mind, if you're doing open space projects, it can achieve both of those goals. With those climate smart communities, the lead applicant for these has to be a local government. And then with those, they have to be matched 50-50 although it does include in-kind match, and they are competitive. So you put in an application for those, and local communities will compete for these. But it covers both planning and implementation, as we just discussed. And then the greenhouse gas mitigation efforts are anything that's outside the power sector, because we do have a sister agency, NYSDEC, that does deal with greenhouse gas mitigation in the power sector. And then, of course, climate adaptation and resilience initiatives. And then there's some additional information in here if you download this PowerPoint, just on how to contact those coordinators as a local community to get moving on seeing how those coordinators can help and support your local efforts. Okay. And that's what I have for you today. And I'll leave this. It has my contact information and also some links out to some of these programs that we talked about today. And
okay, well, thank you very much, Rob. I am looking at chat. And I don't see any questions at this point, so we'll move on. So our next speaker is Colleen Lutz. Colleen is an assistant biologist with the New York Natural Heritage Program, which I also believe is part of the DEC. And she works as a special project assistant for the IMAP invasives team and research support specialist for the zoology program. So with that, I introduce Colleen Lutz.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for including invasives as part of the conversation about open space. Invasive species infestation and management is one of the many challenges facing natural resource practitioners tasked with the preservation of open space in New York State and beyond. Climate change is an additional consideration managers must factor into short and long-term planning for invasive species management. And today I will be talking about the New York State Invasive Species Database and how it can be leveraged to apply for funding to support invasive species projects. IMAP Invasives, I'll refer to it many times just as IMAP. An online map-based platform serves as the invasive species database for New York State. It was originally developed in 2010 and updated in 2019. And this platform serves to aggregate all taxa species location data into a central database managed by the New York State Natural Heritage Program. In addition to documenting the location of invasive species within New York, IMAP has a valuable communication network, which alerts key partners when a new species has been found in their area of interest. The alert system is very important for state invasive species experts who are immediately notified by email when reports are made for high priority species. We encourage various types of users to join IMAP Invasives. It is free and open to all individuals ages 13 and older. And IMAP serves data to various stakeholders, including natural resource professionals and community scientists. Where does the data come from? We receive data from various sources: federal, local, and state agencies, resource managers, and researchers may choose to upload large amounts of data from continuous monitoring projects. This is usually completed with the assistance of heritage staff to ensure all necessary information is added to the database. Colleges and universities have used IMAP within their curriculum to teach invasive species management. The IMAP mobile app, which is available on Google Play and the iTunes Store, has been a useful tool for community scientists and researchers, directly recording observation data in real time, which can be uploaded directly into the database without having to use the online interface. There are 3 different types of data that is included in IMAP. Observations, which include a location and a date of a specific species observed. They can be represented as a point, line, or polygon in the online database. The IMAP mobile app can only record point locations. A second type of data is the treatment. After an observation record is entered, a treatment record may be added to include details about a control effort. These records can be very useful for resource managers because it not only includes the details about the control, whether it's a physical, chemical, or biological treatment, but it can also include additional information about the duration of the treatment, the crew information, and these are generally represented by polygons in the database. And then the third type of data that we see are surveys. What are you searching for? This may include one or multiple species and can result in what we call a non-detected survey, which is yay, you didn't find it, or a detection in which the user would then be prompted to create a presence record. These are usually represented as points or polygons in the record. So what do we do with the data? The data is used for lots of purposes. Primarily, partners use it just to find its species distributions and see what's been reported in their specific location. The accumulated data is also used for research projects by universities and for strategic planning and decision-making by natural resource managers. This visualization highlights the various ways we can view the data in IMAP, and I chose a specific species, which is Hemlock woolly adelgid. The top map is basically traditionally the type of map you would see when you accessed our database online. And it shows the locations of confirmed presence of HWA, Hemlock woolly adelgid, in IMAP in a refined area, which is kind of the Catskill region. The bottom left shows the locations of confirmed presence of Hemlock woolly adelgid overlaid with biodiversity importance. The pink regions really light up the map and represent areas predicted to have higher biodiversity and might be candidates for protection and high priority invasive species management. The bottom right shows a simple distribution of Hemlock woolly adelgid by town in New York State. Orange-filled towns have at least one confirmed observation of HWA. And all of these visualizations can be seen by users that are registered in the IMAP database. IMAP reports are one of the essential tools of the database. They allowed a registered user to determine an area on a map and receive information about what has been reported there. It is important to note that absence of data does not mean absence of species. It just may not have been recorded there yet. Here's a brief overview of the report types in IMAP. At the top left, a species list by geography is a simple list and number of observations of invasive species found within the geography you have determined. The bottom left is the approaching region report at the lower left side of the screen, which includes the invasive species that are near the boundary of interest, but not found within that boundary. For example, the report lists the invasive species that are not yet reported in the town of Wawarsing, but have been observed within 1 kilometers distance from the town boundary. An infested area report, which is on the bottom right of your screen, will determine how much of the area has been infested with the species of interest. In this case, Hemlock woolly adelgid. I can run an infested area report and find out that in the town of Wawarsing, there are 1.29 square kilometers infested with hemlock woolly adelgid. And then the last report on the upper right is a treated area report, which can quantify how much infested area has been treated for one or multiple invasive species. From the report, I can determine that 0.08 square kilometers of hemlock woolly adelgid has been treated in the town of Wawarsing. Therefore, 1.21 square kilometers is left untreated. So as you can see, these reports and visualizations of data could be extremely useful for organizations looking to apply for invasive species management funding. The reports generated by the database can be tailored to the area of interest as determined by the user or by a preset geography, such as a county, town, or conservation land. Funding sources. Where can I find funding? The first thing I have to note is that IMAP Invasives and the New York Natural Heritage Program do not provide funding for the treatment or management of invasive species. However, we do work with partners and stakeholders that do provide funding. One of the best resources for organizations interested in invasive species management is their local partnership for regional invasive species management, or PRISM. That map is shown on the right hand of your screen, and there are 8 PRISMs within New York State. Each one has a host organization, which includes staff and resources to help other organizations across their geographic region. The PRISMs are formed and funded under Title 17 of Environmental Conservation Law. PRISMs set priorities within their geography based on the physical location and other issues that are unique to their region. They coordinate invasive species efforts by recruiting and training volunteers, provide education and outreach about invasive species, and they establish early detection, monitoring, and/or eradication efforts. Reach out to your local PRISM. They may be able to find out what funding is available to you. I would encourage local conservation boards and councils to join the PRISM email listserv. And I've included this website on this slide. And if you scroll to the bottom of the web page, there's a detailed link for instructions about joining the listserv. Generally, PRISMs will advertise upcoming events and, most importantly, funding available for invasive species projects. Another source and partner that we work with is New York Sea Grant, which is a great resource for identifying funding within New York State's coastal zone. Another partner that we work with frequently is the New York Soil and Water Conservation Committee, which is a subcommittee of the New York State Department of Ag and Markets, and they also provide funding. With a little searching and refining, you can find opportunities which support your initiatives. Just to wrap up, I encourage you to become involved with the IMAP Invasives. We encourage you to contribute data and use and analyze the data, and then again, take that data and use it towards developing your funding proposals that you are looking at for your specific project. And always reach out to us. We have some other tools which are not related to the database, but also help with prioritization. And we would be happy to work with you and try to get the information that you need to make your grant applications much more robust. And I put my contact information here, as well as a link to our website, which has tons of information, training, and just to keep you up to date on what's going on in New York State and in the invasive species world. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Colleen. We appreciate that very informative talk. And I'm going to move on to our next speaker. If you can take your screen sharing down. Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ted Fink. He's the founder of GREENPLAN, a professional planning firm that works with communities throughout the Hudson River Valley, Catskills, and upstate New York. I'm looking at his bio. I know that perhaps I'm missing something there, but I know that he's also the town planner for two communities. One is, I think, Red Hook, and was it Wallkill? I'm not quite sure, the second one. In any case, I have great interest in this because my town of Bedford has recently received a grant to map wildlife corridors. And so we're very much interested in the whole issue of connectivity. And that's the subject of Ted's talk. So Ted, take the stage.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Hi, everybody. Let me get my screen set up here so I can share some slides with you. And let's see. There we go. Can you see that, Simon?
Yes, good.
Okay, good. Well, what I'd like to do is give you a rundown of two communities that I've been a consultant to. Warwick, which is in Orange County. I've been with Warwick for more than 30 years. Town of Red Hook in Dutchess County. I've been with them for around 18 years now. And both communities have pursued planning and zoning processes, as well as another additional program that I'll tell you a little bit about, that address habitat connectivity as part of conserving biodiversity within both of those towns. So I'd like to give you just a little bit of background and also emphasize how important it is based on New York State town law to engage residents in a planning process early on if you're considering doing anything like regulating land use for the purposes of biodiversity protection. And it's basically a legislative act to adopt a comprehensive plan, and it's a prerequisite for making any sort of zoning or other land use control changes within the community to first address policies that are directed at things like habitats and water quality and so forth, which both of these communities have undertaken. And if you look at a comprehensive plan, it's a document really that serves the public interest, and it's the one document that expresses the will of residents in a community, and it's really a way for them to decide how they want to live now and in the future. So it's a really important prerequisite to undertaking any kind of changes to a community zoning program or other land use controls. So there's a commonality with both of these communities in the ways that they have addressed habitat and especially habitat connectivity. First, by going through that planning process to engage residents. But then both communities, and in fact, some of these go back to the 1990s when they adopted policies for protecting both habitats as well as water quality and the connectivity of habitat areas. And so they have done that, have changed their zoning. In the case of Warwick, they created what's called a biodiversity conservation overlay zoning district. And in Warwick, they also amended both their subdivision regulations as well as their zoning to adopt a new way of looking at subdivision design. And that's a 4-step conservation subdivision design process that's embedded within the zoning. Red Hook followed a very similar path. They also amended their zoning and their subdivision regulations to adopt a conservation subdivision design process. They also created other tools that I'll get into in just a few minutes. And Red Hook at the present time is also looking to update their comprehensive plan. They're hoping to get some state funding to be able to do that so that they can consider some additional zoning amendments that were recommended by a plan that was done. It wasn't officially adopted at this point, but it was a pilot program, the Hudson River Estuary Program, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. So first I want to take you to Warwick. And going back to a 1999 comprehensive plan that the town adopted, there were 3 key policies that drove the efforts to protect biodiversity in the town. And one was a policy that simply said, protect habitats and water quality. protect wetlands as important environmental resources, and protect environmentally sensitive areas. These are the kind of broad policy statements that are important to have in a comprehensive plan. And so that in the event of a challenge or anything like that to any sort of a zoning regulation that's enacted, that the town will have proof and verification that they have enacted those zoning regulations in accordance with a comprehensive plan. And that's a concept, it's called the in accordance with rule. And that actually goes back to the 1920s, the state enabling acts that were developed many, many years ago. And so those were the three key policies that drove the creation of their biodiversity conservation overlay zoning district. So one of the things that Warwick did is they were working on these things. We were working on these things, I should say, simultaneously in developing that conservation subdivision design process. But Warwick had the benefit of having a Southern Wallkill biodiversity plan that was prepared by the Metropolitan Conservation Alliance under a grant from the Hudson River Estuary Program and others. And it actually addressed not only Warwick, but also Chester and Goshen in Orange County as well. And the town used that plan as the basis for establishing the biodiversity conservation overlay zoning district. This is what it looks like, the map on the right. This is the overlay zoning district. You can see the areas in green that were identified in the plan as being important for conservation of habitats and biodiversity. And just by looking at the maps, you can see that there are broad interconnections that are made between all of the habitat areas in the town. And so what we tried to do was to ensure that not only were there specific rules that would govern the kinds of subdivisions and site plans that were applied for within this biodiversity overlay district, and that they were subject to a habitat assessment process, but that they were properly integrated into the subdivision rules, because that's most of the development that occurs in the town of Warwick. It's largely a residential agricultural community, and the town was faced at that time with many large-scale subdivision applications. The largest, of course, was the Sterling Forest development in Warwick and a couple of other towns where there were thousands of units that were proposed. That later became Sterling Forest, so that went away. But nevertheless, the town is right in the New Jersey border, as you can see, and was subject to a lot of development pressures. Which was one of the reasons why the Metropolitan Conservation Alliance went ahead and prepared the biodiversity plan for this area, because it was under such extreme development pressures. So just to give you a little bit of a quick background as far as what is a overlay district, for anyone that's not familiar with this, this is a zoning district that is overlaid on top of existing zoning districts. And as you can see from the illustration, it can go over a residential, an office, commercial, any other zoning district, and it identifies a specific area wherein, or a specific resource wherein additional rules are enacted in order to do certain things. In this case, to identify habitats, to ensure that there was an on-site assessment by a qualified biologist, and to design the subdivisions and the site plans so that they avoid identified biodiversity resources. So that's basically the way that the biodiversity overlay district works. Conservation subdivision design. This is something that has been in place in Warwick since 2001. It's been used fairly successfully. Most subdivisions that occur within the town are conservation subdivision. And essentially what you do within this process, it's dissimilar from many of the cluster subdivisions that you may be familiar with, in that the first and most important part of the process is that you identify what are called primary and secondary conservation areas on a property. These are the areas that have conservation value, and they can be anywhere from wetlands and extremely steep slopes that normally wouldn't be developed, and those are designated as primary conservation areas. And then secondary areas, they might be agricultural soils, they might be rock outcrops, things that add value to a community and to a property. And these are all identified on a plan. And it's what's done before any other planning takes place, so that these are the areas that are to be conserved as part of the subdivision process. The next step is to locate the streets and the trails. The third is to locate the house sites. And the final one is to draw in the lot lines that become the lots that are eventually approved and offered for sale to any potential buyer. And in the town, the conservation subdivision process, it can be mandated in Warwick when there is the presence of significant habitats, stream corridors, forests, town designated protection areas, and a number of other resources that may be on a particular property. And Warwick has a range of minimum required open space that's preserved in a conservation subdivision, ranging from 50 to 80% required open space. And a very important aspect of this, a mandatory part of it, is, and this really relates to the connectivity aspect of it, is that there's a conservation context map that shows other conservation areas adjoining the property and within the surrounding area, so that there can be better planning for protecting wildlife corridors and making connections with other surrounding areas that are proposed as open space or are already existing open space areas through other processes, town parks, county parks, state parks, or conservation lands that have been protected through conservation easements. So that's basically the conservation subdivision design process in Warwick, the way that it works. And pretty much the process has gone through a review where hundreds of lots have been now created with biodiversity restrictions in place. You can see just an excerpt from a subdivision plan where there was a state protected freshwater wetland that of course has the 100-foot adjacent area that is also protected as part of the state freshwater wetland program. In this case, it was potential bog turtle habitat. And so there's, as you can see, if you can see it on that map, there's a 300-foot wetlands buffer that was also imposed as part of this subdivision application process, and that's a no-build zone. And that was part of the subdivision that was approved for this particular property. There are a number of important features of this that protect lands in perpetuity, such as conservation easements. The town in some cases also uses deed restrictions and other mitigation that's identified in Hudsonia's Biodiversity Assessment Manual that is referred to specifically in the Biodiversity Conservation Overlay rules. There's also peer review required. There's quality control if it's needed after an application has been approved and the subdivision is getting built out. So these are things that are all integrated into the process. A couple of other notable features is that the town also, when they get an application for subdivision approval, they send out early neighborhood notification letters to people that would normally not be informed of an application for subdivision approval until an actual public hearing has been scheduled. So these letters are sent out as soon as an application comes in so that they become aware of a potential subdivision approval that might be coming, and many times people show up at the planning board meetings. They want to know what what gives, and they can have some say through the process before the planning board. And I think an interesting aspect of this is that even though the town does have large areas that are in the biodiversity overlay district, biodiversity now gets a lot more attention in other areas of the town that may not be within the overlay district, but are areas that are also frequently now subject to assessments as part of the subdivision review and approval process and the seeker reviews that go on for that. So that's a little background on what Warwick has done. Warwick does have many other planning tools actually that include biodiversity as well as habitat protection and habitat connectivity. And a big one is the Community Preservation Plan and Fund. Warwick sought special state legislation to be able to impose a real estate transfer tax. And this goes back to 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. It was the first Hudson Valley community to seek that sort of a special legislation. A few years later, the legislature opened it up to Westchester and Putnam County. In 2019, and the legislature opened it up to Ulster County, and there have been a few other scattered towns in the state that have also sought special state legislation to be able to impose a real estate transfer tax. And these are used to protect what's called community preservation. And they are subject to a voter referendum, which passed in the town of Warwick. It was actually the second referendum the town had. They also sought a bond referendum to purchase development rights throughout the town. And when that ran dry, that's when the town sought the community preservation planning process from the legislature. So that's a rundown on what Warwick has done. And next on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Red Hook has done. They have a comprehensive plan that goes all the way back to 1990. It's still in effect today. And that particular comprehensive plan had a very good policy to develop an inventory of important wildlife, plant communities, and habitats in the town to protect them. And this included preservation of undeveloped areas and open space corridors. And that included both stream and wetland corridors. So that was a lot of foresight on the part of the town to have adopted a policy like that 30 years ago. And that is one of the things that has driven a lot of the plans and programs that Red Hook has moved forward on in terms of wildlife protection. There's also, in addition to the comprehensive plan, Red Hook also developed an open space plan, and that open space plan developed a target to protect between 8,000 and 13,000 acres of the town of areas that were identified as open space. And these included the wildlife corridors and the connections between different habitat areas. So Red Hook followed in Warwick's footsteps, so to speak, and they also created a purchase and development rights program. The voters authorized a bond act in 2003, and when those funds were expended, the town extended that PDR program by also seeking the approval of the legislature to be able to impose a real estate transfer tax for land preservation purposes in the town. Much of the emphasis in Red Hook, like it was in Warwick, I should mention, the focus was on protecting agriculture as viable land uses within the community. But certainly these community preservation plans and the PDR programs have been used for many other purposes to protect other areas of important open space. And much of this overlapped with agriculture in terms of protecting water quality and habitats and so forth. So in Red Hook, to date, they've protected nearly 3,000 acres under their PDR program. There is an additional 6,000 acres that are already protected from other sources of funding in the town. So they're pretty well on their way to meeting that goal of up to 13,000 acres in the town to be protected. And so one other thing that I wanted to mention is, in addition to this, there were also habitat protection measures that the town has taken with new zoning tools.
So Ted, I hate to interrupt you. We only have 10 minutes left, and I have another speaker, and I'm sure they're going to be want to have questions. So I was wondering if you could wrap it up within the next minute or two. I hate
absolutely. I'm just about finished here, Simon. And what I'd like to do is I'm going to have this presentation available in a PDF format, and I'm almost through here. So what I have is a lot of links that I provided so that any of the attendees can go and take a look at these regulations and the plans and so forth that have been developed. And so I'm going to end it right there so you can get everybody else on board. And I'll provide this to you, Simon, so you can get it out there to your attendees.
I thank you very much, Ted. I appreciate it. And for the attendees, know that this is a recording and we'll make it available. And Ted Ted is reachable. He's a very, I've spoken to Ted on numerous occasions, and he's a very knowledgeable individual. So he's a good guy to know. Thank you very much. Our last speaker.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. And if you can stop screen sharing, we can get into our last speaker. Thank you. Our last speaker is Gloria VanDuyne. She's the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator. If any of you have ever gotten grants from the DEC, you probably have met Gloria already. So I give the floor to you, Gloria.
Thanks very much, Simon. Sorry. Okay, we're good?
We're good.
Okay, thanks.
I'm also going to say that if this thing goes over 1 o'clock, we'll keep it running. I don't believe there's anything coming on. Oh, I may be wrong. So we may have to shut down by 1 o'clock. So I mean by 4 o'clock. So keep that in your mind. Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks. So since we are a little short on time, I'm just going to get right into this. There are a lot of tree-related grants that that DEC and others offer. One is specifically urban forestry, but there are water quality grants, watershed-related grants, climate, transportation, environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, and even federal and private. There's a lot of overlap. Those can all include trees depending on the grant program. So, for instance, in transportation, there are complete streets grants, and those include trees. These next 3 slides were provided by our Legislative Affairs Office. This is information directly from the Bond Act. Rob was showing, I think, probably the same information, just with different colors. What I did was I just circled some of the things that might include trees in the grants. And this is just I looked through it. I don't get to decide where any of the money goes. We don't even know if it's going to pass. We're just giving you some information. So I looked at this and just said, okay, so here's some green infrastructure. Here's some urban forestry, perhaps local waterfront revitalization or projects that address inland flooding, perhaps forest conservation. I don't know what that is going to mean. And here's something for municipal parks. This is a wording that's came right from the Bond Act. What I can talk about are existing grants that we have now, and I'll talk about the urban forestry grants. And let me just get to where I am. And the Urban and Community Forestry Program does have a regular grant program. It's funded by the Environmental Protection Fund, and we have 4 regularly funded projects. One is tree inventory, one is a community forest management plan. We usually recommend those are together. One is for tree planting and one is for tree maintenance. The tree maintenance does have inventory as a prerequisite because we want you to be as efficient as possible. And if you don't know what you have and what condition it is in, then it's harder to manage. Also, if you have an inventory and then you can prioritize what you're going to be spending your time on. That does save time and money. I know that when I have time to work on something, if I have a list in order, it's a lot easier to go to that list and pull out the next item and go work on it than it is to sit down and figure out what else to work on without any kind of plan. When we have grants, we always have an information session before we release the RFA, the request for applications. And so you should watch for those. And we also suggest that you work with our local DEC urban forester, and you can either contact me to find out who that is, or you can contact your local DEC forestry office. So for our grants, but also for pretty much all grant applications, the planning is key. You need to know what your goals are going to be. Who are the planners who are going to be involved? The engineers, are residents going to be involved? They should be in some way. They should at least know what's going on. Are the DPW going to be involved, or parks? What partners are you going to include in your project? We always require a partner. That's an unpaid, as in not a contractor, but an unpaid group like your tree board, like your conservation advisory council, like Scouts or your Rotary Club or something like that. Who all needs to be on board and involved, and who can be involved? Strong urban and community forestry programs have partners. They are not just the municipality doing it by themselves without support from outside. We also require in our grants education and outreach. We don't want our grants to be a secret, and by promoting not only the grant and what you're doing, you're also promoting urban forestry and taking care of the urban forest. The only trees that you guys, for the most part, have jurisdiction over are the public trees. So the more you can educate landowners or homeowners about what you're doing, you're educating them about what they could do on their own property. So that's really important to us. That gives our grants a larger impact. Long-term care is essential, and I'll get into that. Tree planting is not dropping a tree in a hole. There are a lot of, first I want to ask you, how long would you like your trees to live? 2 years? Is that long enough? Probably not. It's a lot more than dropping a tree in a hole, and we people have created a tough environment. When I refer to urban forestry, it's urban and community, meaning not just seriously, distinctly urban like downtown Albany or New York City, but any place that's developed. The forest that's not the rural forest is probably an urban and community forest. And so we want to talk about the right tree, right site. When you're talking about right tree, right site, you want to look at what's above ground and below ground for space for the tree. What's going to fit? Is a sycamore going to fit there, or a London plane tree, or an oak, or is it more of a crabapple site? You can see in every single community, I guarantee, I would bet all of my savings on it, that you can find trees that were planted in the wrong site. And now they're too big, they're heaving sidewalks, they're doing all sorts of damage, or they're getting damaged because they're just too big for that site. Nearby utilities and structures. If the crown of the tree is 60 feet wide, you better not have buildings that it's going to crash into, metaphorically speaking. You want a tree that's going to fit where it's going to be. Road salt. You don't want, what are the conditions of the site? Is it exposed to road salt? Sun, what's the sun exposure? Are there winds, high winds, say near a river or a large lake? Soil type and pH. I said the sun exposure. Drought. Is it very drought? Is it wet? Are there fruits and seeds? When you start looking at what species to choose, are there fruits and seeds? Do you really want those hanging over a sidewalk or dropping on a sidewalk? Those might be better for a park, depending on, it really depends on the site. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, I'm hoping there's structural soil underneath that sidewalk or in between those trees, because if that's the size of the pit for the roots, that tree is not going to live very long. And the goal is to increase your long-lived canopy. Urban and community trees don't have a really long lifespan, but that's on us, because we created the difficult environment, and we need to create an environment in which they're going to live and thrive and last a really long time. You want to, so for instance, if you plant the tree too high, the roots are going to dry out. If you plant it too deeply or pile too much mulch around the trunk, it's gonna be stressed, and it's gonna be more susceptible to pests and diseases. You don't want to lose trees because you didn't take care of them, so you're going to want to water them and do all of that early tree care, and you're going to want to do ongoing maintenance. If you don't have the capacity on your own, brainstorm who might help. Like I said, really successful urban forestry programs don't happen just by the municipality. It has outside help in partners. And so brainstorm who can help, bring others in and have them think about and make suggestions, business owners, schools, scouts, Rotary groups, residents, help them help you. And it's a win-win situation.
Gloria, I'm just going to interrupt. It is 4:01. I think we can extend this about another 5 minutes or so.
Okay.
There are other people coming in. Technically it'll work. So just continue your.
Okay. I've only got. Yep.
Okay.
So
thank you. Sorry.
I just want to emphasize that long-term care of your projects is essential, and we look for that in our grant applications. And at this point, I have to feel free to tell you, if you don't plan on taking care of whatever it is you're doing, don't bother, because it's a waste of your time, your money, your credibility. And if you're planting trees, it's a waste of plant material. And there is a shortage of planting material now. So I won't go into all the details of the aspects of long-term care that I think you ought to focus on, but you can have a copy of this. I have notes in here, but I guess the other point I can make is dead trees don't provide you with any benefits, so you want to take care of it. Notifications. Any DEC grants that go out are getting put into DEC Delivers, which are our e-newsletters. The one for urban forestry is in the Forest, Plants, and Land Conservation. That actually has a lot of things that the Division of Lands and Forests does. At the bottom, it always has an urban forestry corner. But there are also invasive species, environmental justice, water newsletters. And if you go to DEC's homepage, and go down to the bottom left, click on DEC Delivers, you can go and choose all of the notifications that you'd like to receive. And that's it. How's that, Simon?
That is great, Gloria. Thank you so much. Actually, we don't, let me see if I just see one, let me see if I have another question here. Okay, so I think there was a question to Rob earlier that Rob actually answered in chat. So hopefully you can all go back and view the chat and pick up the answer that Rob did. It was about basically examples of open space projects that have been funded. He gives a very a good answer to that, lengthy answer to that. The same question was asked of Colleen. Are there any examples of funded projects for invasive species? And if Colleen, if you could give us a short answer to that question, that would be great.
It's difficult for me to answer that just because we don't provide funding. So it's hard for me to kind of speculate what other projects, but I can think of, I can find out some projects. The best place to look at that would be at your local PRISM. So they actually list all the projects that they fund each year. And the Lower Hudson PRISM actually has funded quite a few projects. So they would be a good resource to look at different types of projects that are funded. But I think a lot of them at that level are their management, so treatment type of funding that they do. So
Okay.
That would be a good place to look, your local Prism, to see what they're doing on the local scale.
Great. And then one other question came in. How can we get copies of the PowerPoint presentations? And the answer to that is that NYSDEC has asked the presenters to send us their presentations. We have a resource file both on our conference website and on our NYSDEC website. And again, this was going to be recorded, so we'll make that available to all the recipients. And having said that, I see one other chat. Is there any place I can get a list of the funded projects mentioned by Rob? Okay, so Rob, that's a question. That'll be our last question. If you can answer that, is there a source for funded projects?
Somebody can email me and I'll leave my PowerPoint presentation with you and you can keep it there. My contact information is in there and I can get full detailed information for anybody who emails me. That's probably the easiest way to do that.
Okay, great. So I'm going to end this on that note that we have a lot of resources available. You can certainly go to the direct sources, but NYSDEC is, again, nysdec.org is our website. And nysdec.net is our website, our conference website. So both sources, certainly nysdec.net, you can go first before we put it into our organization website. So having said that, I want to thank all our panelists profusely. I think all of you were extremely informative. And having said that, because we are late and another group is probably sitting on your lap for the 4 o'clock presentation, I'm going to end the recording and also end the meeting. So thank you all for coming. I do see, before I do that, I do see some chat things here. Yeah, all those chats are contact information, so you can basically copy those into a Word document, and I'll leave that up for another 30 seconds. So to give you the opportunity to do that. And having said that, thank you very much. And I think 30 seconds is over. All right. Have a great afternoon all. Bye-bye.